Um, Good morning. I'm Stephen Herzenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Keystone Research Center, which houses the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, which we have proudly watched grow from a small project into a powerful juggernaut with research, policy, and communications capacity and a fantastic campaign staff. This year is roughly the 15th PBPC Budget Summit and the very first all-digital one. We've adapted our format this year to avoid the Zoom fatigue that would occur if we tried to take our traditional 7-hour in-person event and do 7 hours straight on Zoom. But over the next 3 Thursdays, we'll bring all our attendees what they have come to expect: a deep dive into the current negotiations over the budget for the fiscal year that begins on July 1st, and the challenges facing Pennsylvania, an inspiring keynote speech, in this case from Governor Wolf later today, workshops with experts and advocates examining budget-related issues that affect the lives of all Pennsylvanians, and a panel discussion with state lawmakers who are champions for a commonwealth in which there is broadly shared prosperity. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Marc Stier, now PBPC's leader for the 6th year, during which it has grown into the juggernaut that it is today. As most of you know, Marc has an illustrious career as an academic and then as an advocate and a policymaker. Marc is unusual in terms of his ability to do first-class academic research, but also to communicate that research in less wonky ways and to link it with advocacy and with campaign work. It's a combination of skills that allows Marc to have impact and allows PBPC to have more impact. And so, I want to thank Marc for his leadership and the whole PBPC team. And with that, take it away, Marc, and tell us about this year's budget.
Thanks very much, Steve. And thank you all who are watching this unusual budget summit carried out in a very different way, but I hope it'll be as informative as we usually are. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the presentation on the budget that Diane and I are going to present. Is that working? Cool. All right, so this is our plenary session, our analysis of the governor's budget. I'm going to start off, then I'm going to turn it over to Diana Polson, our policy analyst, who does most of the work in figuring out the details of the budget. This is going to be a little different than our usual budget presentation. Rather than going through all the details of the budget in this hour-long session, we're going to focus on major initiatives. They are so important this year, and they're so bold this year, and they're so related to the COVID-19 crisis that we think it makes sense to focus just on them. And for all the details that you usually hear us talk about in somewhat excruciating detail, we invite you to look at the budget analysis that is now posted live on our website and to check back over the next couple of weeks, because we're going to be breaking that out into various parts of what we call the Know the Issues section, little bite-sized pieces so you can understand what's going on, the details of in many aspects of the budget. So I'm going to begin by talking about the state's role in creating a just recovery in the state, what it should be doing and why. The COVID-19 pandemic has, as I think we all know, been felt most deeply by low-income workers. They've lost the jobs, they've lost their income. That's not true for people with upper incomes and professional managerial jobs. And they've been working in dangerous conditions to provide us with the services that we need, even as this pandemic continued. It's revealed deep educational inequities. The ability of districts to adjust to the conditions under which they've had to educate kids varies widely depending on how much income and how many Black people live in those districts. It's accelerated industry restructuring. We've been losing businesses in rural PA in some areas, urban areas, for some time. There's some evidence that that's accelerated in the last year. There's been a clear impact on brick and mortar stores as people have shifted to online purchasing. And it's revealed continued inequities in our state's tax system. We've lost over $5 billion in tax revenues. That includes last year's budget, this year's budget, and the budget coming up on July 1st. We've had to pay at least an additional $3 billion in expenditures, mostly for medical assistance, which is what we call Medicaid in Pennsylvania. We are losing more than many other states, in part because our tax system is so unfair, because we really don't tax rich people the way we should, as we'll talk about a little bit more soon. Now, all these problems are things we at PBPC have been talking about for years. Many of you have been talking about them for years. They're all central to the We the People campaign, but they become much more apparent as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And they really set the stage for what we need from a Pennsylvania budget in the next year. And I'm happy to say that Governor Wolf has presented major initiatives that, as we'll discover today, are meant to address those problems. He's called to raise the minimum wage. He's called to reconfigure how we fund education and to add more than $1 billion to basic education funding. He's called to establish the Nelly Scholarship Program, which will help our kids go to college. He's implemented a Black to Work PA program, which I'll talk a little about more in a moment. And he's called for major forms of tax reform. Now, these aren't new ideas. The governor's been calling for them for the first term, since the beginning of his first term. And there's been some criticism of him for rolling out these ideas again. But I think he should be praised not for rolling out ideas a second, third, or fourth time, but for being prescient about what this state needs. Because the problems I just pointed to are not new problems. All those things, unfair taxes, industry restructuring, low wages, et cetera. They've been problems in our state for a long time. They're not new. They've been made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic, but mostly they've been revealed to us by the COVID-19 pandemic. That is, to those of us who weren't aware of them. But the governor has been aware of them, and he's been trying to address them for a long time. He should be praised for doing that, and it's time for the public, and even more so the General Assembly, to catch up. Now, I'm just going to say a little bit more about Back to Work PA, because we don't discuss it that much later, since it's really outside the budget. It's a program to fund workforce training, where the state actually has made pretty significant progress in recent years, and to provide help for new business, particularly in manufacturing. This is going to be funded by a $3 billion bond issue to be paid back by severance tax revenues. Now, you know, we're the only state in the country that's a major natural gas producer that doesn't have a severance tax. It's long past time that we have one. Whether you support fracking or are really dubious about it, and many of us are, the state and the public should be getting some of the revenues from fracking the way other states do. And the governor is proposing to use those revenues to fund a program that we think will help our economy recover and help adjust to the new conditions created, but not solely created by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, let me go ahead and start talking about the governor's budget. This chart shows the various parts of the state budget. One thing you should be aware of is the general fund, which is what we mostly mean when we talk about the state budget, is only part of the state budget. Almost 40% of what is spent by the state comes from the federal government, mostly for medical assistance, which again is what we call Medicaid. And only 63% of state funds flow through the general fund, although that's most of what we talk about. There's discussion in our budget analysis about the relationship between the general fund and the special funds, particularly the big one, the motor license fund, and to a lesser extent, the lottery fund. Now, one of the favorite talking points of folks on the right is government's out of control. It's taking more of your money. It's spending more all the time. This is simply not true. In fact, the opposite has been true. Sure, if you look at the actual total of that is spent in the general fund, it goes up every year. But you know, population goes up, inflation goes up, costs go up. If you look at government as a share of the gross state product of what is produced in the whole state, it's in fact been going down. Back in '97, it was about 5% of this gross state product. It's been dropping to almost 4% in recent years. And it's this lack of funding and lack of expenditure that explains what we call our public investment deficit, the fact that we underinvest in education at all levels, that we underinvest in human services, particularly for childcare and housing support, that we underinvest in the infrastructure. We all pay what I like to call the pothole tax. That's the tax that comes from the damage our bad roads and bridges cause to our cars. We have a public investment deficit in environmental protection as well, which is why the state is pretty bad when it comes to the quality of our water and air compared to other states. Now, the governor proposes to reverse this trend. Here's a table with basically the same data. We've seen a drop of about 9% in spending compared as a share of gross state product in recent years compared to the average from 97 to 2011. The governor wants to reverse that in the short term. Over the long term, there's a decline, but we would argue that we need to keep going in the direction the governor proposes for next year, spending more and taxing more so that we get the public services that we need and we close the public investment deficit. Let's talk about taxation a bit more. This pie chart shows where taxes come from. As I'm sure you know, most of the money that flows in the state comes from the personal income tax and from the sales tax. This chart shows who actually pays taxes. It divides the households and families of Pennsylvania into various groups. On the far left, you see the 20% of households with the lowest incomes. Those are people who have an income below $23,000 a year.
Mark, sorry to interrupt you, but your
Yes.
slide chart is showing all black for us right now. So I want to make sure people can see the pie chart that you're talking about.
I'm past the pie chart. I'm on the share of income chart. Are you not seeing anything?
We aren't.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop the share and restart it. Sometimes that fixes it.
Perfect, thank you.
Were you seeing it up until about now?
Yep, we saw right up until you were talking about a pie chart.
Okay, well, those pie charts don't go well with Zoom, it seems. How's that? Can you see that?
It's still black for me.
Huh. Okay, I stopped the share again. Let me try it again. How's that?
Still black. Do you want me to try, Mark?
Yeah, do you want to try to do that? I'll stop my share and
Okay.
you can.
Thanks, y'all, and thanks for your patience.
Yeah, I'm sorry, everyone. I'm not quite sure what happened.
Diana, I see yours perfectly. Thank you.
Great. Okay, let's go on to the next one, Diana. Great. So I was talking about who pays taxes in Pennsylvania, and you can see that over on the left, the families with the lowest 20% of incomes, people need an income below $23,000 to be in this bottom quintile. They pay 13.8% of their taxes, of their income in state and local taxes. In the middle 20%, and that's people who have an average of $54,000 a year in income, families pay 54.1%. I'm sorry, people pay 11.1% of their income in state and local taxes. And all the way on the right, at the top 1%, and these are people with an average income of $1.5 million a year, people pay only 6% of their income in taxes. This is problematic for lots of reasons. First of all, it's terribly unfair. At the very least, taxes should be flat and everyone should pay the same percentage of their income in taxes. Ideally, those who have more money should pay a higher percentage of their income in state and local taxes. And then the second problem is it doesn't raise enough money. The reason we have to tax rich people is because, particularly at a time when income inequality is becoming greater and greater, we're not going to raise enough money for the state unless we tax rich people. So that's a very serious problem. So let's go on to the next slide and we'll start looking at how the governor proposes to fix it. And governor proposes to raise the personal income tax rate from 3.07 to 4.49%. Now that's for everyone. As I think most of you know, because of our state constitution, we can only tax people in our personal income tax at one rate. We have what's called the uniformity clause that prohibits graduated tax rates that many states have. So what he does is propose to increase the personal income tax rate from 3.07% to 4.49%. But he also proposes to expand Pennsylvania's tax forgiveness program. This is a program that allows moderate and low-income households to avoid paying some or all of their personal income tax. Let's go on to the next slide and look at some of the details of that proposal. Now, the governor, we've had tax forgiveness for a number of years, but it's been set at pretty low levels. Right now, if you're a single person, you don't pay personal income taxes if your income is $6,500 or below. The governor proposes to expand it to $15,000 a year. For people who are single with one child, the current cutoff is for tax forgiveness is $16,000 a year, and the governor proposes to raise that to $25,000. For people who are married with 2 children, the current cutoff is $32,000 a year. The governor proposes to raise it to $50,000 a year. Now, these are levels at which no personal income tax would be paid. Then the governor proposes to gradually reduce tax forgiveness for people at higher levels of income. So for any single people making $49,000 a year or less, their taxes will be reduced. For a single person with 2 children, up to $69,000 a year, their taxes will be reduced. And for a family of 4 with income up to $84,000 a year, their taxes will be reduced. So what the governor does is raise the rate generally, but then provide an expanded tax forgiveness program to reduce taxes for people at lower incomes. And if we look at the next slide, we can see the impact of this on our total tax system. You can see we haven't created a flat tax with those green bars, but if the governor's proposal is adopted, we will see a much fairer tax system. At the low end, the share of income that goes to state and local taxes will drop from 13.8% to 12.6%. At the high end, the share of income of the top 1% that goes to state and local taxes will jump from 6% to 7.2%. That's not a huge improvement, but it is a major step in the right direction. And the first step the state has taken in this direction for well over 20 years. But going to the next slide, you can see who's actually going to pay those taxes. In the bottom 60%, people actually get a tax cut. In the 4th quintile, they pay a little bit more. Most of the people who are going to be paying a lot more taxes are in the top 5%. And the top 1%, where the average income is $1.6 million a year, people will be paying $18,000 a year and more in state personal income taxes. That's a lot of money, but it's really not that much for someone making that kind of income in the state. And it really is time that they pay their fair share. Now let's turn to corporate taxes and go on to the next slide and look at that. Corporate taxes have been providing a lower and lower share of general fund revenues over time. Back in 1972, 30% of general fund revenues came from corporate taxes. That's down to about 15% now. Why has that happened? Well, for one thing, we eliminated one of the corporate taxes, the corporate stock and franchise tax. And then we've reduced rates and created more loopholes in the corporate net income taxes. And of course, there's a huge loophole, we call it the Delaware loophole, that allows 73% of corporations that do business in the state, mostly big multinational and international corporations, from paying any taxes at all. Now, if these changes had not been made, we would be raising another $4 billion a year from corporate taxes. Now, think about what we could do with $4 billion a year, how that could help with our public investment deficit in education at all levels, infrastructure, human services, and environmental protection. This is money that has been lost to the state and major important public services that we haven't been able to provide. Now, what the governor proposes, as we can see in the next slide, is to gradually lower the corporate income tax rate, but to do so by combining it with something called combined reporting, which will ensure that corporations pay their fair share by closing the Delaware loophole, and will stop 73% of corporations that operate in the state from escaping corporate taxes. I'm not going to go into the details of the Delaware loophole today, but you can read about it in our budget analysis. Now let's talk about another critical subject, raising the state minimum wage. It's important to raise the minimum wage for 2 reasons. One, to reduce income inequality and to enable people with low incomes to make a family sustaining wage. As you know, we've had a 40-year growth in inequality in which incomes are unequal and possibly more unequal than they were in the Gilded Age of the late 19th century. The most important step we can take to reducing income inequality, not the only one, but probably the most important one, is to raise the minimum wage. Others are making it easier for labor unions to form and instituting the kind of tax reform we're talking about. The second reason we need to raise the minimum wage is about economic recovery. 70% of the economy is driven by consumption. Now, we know rich people save much of the money they make because they make so much. People with low incomes, they spend their money. And if we want to drive the economy forward, we've got to increase consumption. And if we lift wages for low income people, they will buy more, they'll spend more, they will drive the economy forward. More consumption means more production and more investment in productive capacity, which increases productivity for all of us and actually benefits all of us. So raising the minimum wage initially is designed to help people with low incomes and low wages, but ultimately it can help all of us by creating a fairer and more prosperous economy. Next slide, Diana. The governor proposes to raise, oh, I'm sorry, I was looking in the wrong place. Could you just go back? The governor proposes to increase the minimum wage to $12 an hour on July 1st, 2021, and then to increase the minimum wage by additional 50 cents until the minimum wage reaches $15 per hour in 2027. He also proposes to eliminate the tip minimum wage. As many of you know, tipping has its origins in the post-Civil War era. It was directed at Black people. Now it harms them and it harms women who often are more subject to sexual harassment at work because they work for tips. And those tips don't make up for lower wages. By 2027, 27% of the Pennsylvania workforce, 1.6 million people, will be making $6 billion more a year if we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And that's really critical to economic recovery and economic growth. In addition, more money will be brought into the state and personal income taxes and sales taxes, and that will provide money for also for closing our public investment deficit. Next slide. Let's take a look at who actually benefits from raising the minimum wage. Most of the folks who will benefit from a $15 minimum wage are not teenagers. 80% of them are adults. 61% of them are women, and that's because women tend to work in lower paid jobs. Next slide. White workers make up most of those who benefit from the minimum wage, but when we get to $15 an hour, 66.5%. But if we look at the next slide, we'll see that Black workers and Hispanic workers disproportionately benefit from increasing the minimum wage, with 48.4% of Hispanic workers and 40% of Black workers getting a pay boost when we get to $15 per hour in 2027. That's, of course, because of inequality in the job market and Black and Hispanic workers working in lower wage jobs. Next slide. Most of the people who benefit from a minimum wage increase are full-time workers, although some of them are part-time and mid-time workers. Obviously, people make their choices about how to apportion the lives between work and taking care of their kids and taking care of elders. All of them deserve an increase in the minimum wage. Next slide. And then more than half the workers who will benefit from raising the minimum wage work in service industries and healthcare. And as you know, those are the industries that are the frontline industries, among some others. And they've been providing the essential work that we've been needing in this COVID-19 period. They've been doing so even though their wages have been so low, and even though in many cases, and maybe most cases, they haven't had the proper protection from COVID-19 itself. They've been putting their lives on the line. They've been working really hard, and it really is time to compensate them with an increase in the minimum wage up to $12 an hour on July 1st, 2021. And with that, I will stop and turn this presentation over to Diana, and I'll be around to answer your questions later if you have any. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Mark. Can you hear me okay?
Diana, do you mind if I make a quick announcement?
Sure.
Hi, this is Adrienne again. I wanted to let everybody who's joining us on the Whova app know that if you have any questions at any time during this presentation, you can enter them into the Q&A section, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. There's also a chat if you want to chat with each other about what you're hearing. And at the end, we're going to be going through and answering some of those questions. Sorry about that. Take it away, Diana.
That's okay. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through an overview of proposed expenditures, and then we'll dive into the details around education funding at all levels and human services. So let me give you a quick overview of proposed general fund spending. Governor Wolf has proposed a general fund budget of $37.8 billion this year. This is an increase of 11% from the previous year, which is a significant and much needed increase considering our current crisis and the fact that last year's budget was essentially flat funded. This pie chart shows spending by category in the general fund. So as you can see, education and human services, which include medical assistance and long-term living and other human services, account for more than 3/4 of general fund spending in Pennsylvania. One of Governor Wolf's most substantial proposals this year is for K-12 education funding. Last year, pre-K to 12 education accounted for 36% of general fund spending in the governor's executive budget. This year, it accounts for 39% of his plan. So let's get into the governor's education budget. This graph shows overall pre-K funding over time and proposed this year. As you can see, Governor Wolf is proposing a $14.7 billion budget for education, which would be an increase of nearly 14% from last year's budget. This is a significant increase, and just for some comparison's sake, Governor Wolf his proposed budget for education last year was only a 2.1% increase from 2019-20, So the last figure showed the whole pre-K to 12 education budget, and this figure focuses only on what we call classroom funding, and this excludes items such as pensions and transportation that don't go directly into K through 12 classrooms. So Governor Wolf proposes a substantial and much needed increase this year of nearly 19% or $1.3 billion. So another way to look at this data is to show the yearly change in classroom funding each year since the massive Corbett cuts in 2011-12, which you can see on the orange bar all the way to the left. Governor Wolf's proposed increase to classroom funding of $1.3 billion obviously is much larger than yearly increases over the last 10 years. In fact, the increase he proposes this year is larger than the cumulative increase since he has taken office. So funding for K through 12 education in Pennsylvania comes primarily from state and local governments. Compared to other states, Pennsylvania provides a relatively low share of total K through 12 funding. So Pennsylvania provides 38% compared to the national average of 47%. As a result, Pennsylvania ranks 44th in the nation for the state share of total K through 12 education funding. The outcome of this is that local governments need to raise the rest of the money necessary to fund their schools via property taxes, despite wildly different tax bases. So this leads to great inequities between school systems. Districts with the richest tax base fare much better than those with the poorest. In fact, Pennsylvania has the greatest disparity in funding between our wealthy and poor school districts than any other state, with students in our poorest districts receiving 33% less than students in our richest districts. The next two graphs I'm going to show you are with data from the year or two prior, but I want to share because it highlights these inequities in school funding. So this graph is from last year's budget analysis, but I wanted to show it because it shows racial inequities that currently exist in our state funding system. Here we divided Pennsylvania's 500 school districts into two groups, those with a high share of students of color, with the bar on your left, and those with a low share, which is the bar on your right. As you can see, school districts with a high share of students of color receive less per student funding than those with a low share. The fair funding formula, which is the amount in the lighter blue color, is starting to provide more resources to districts with a high share of students of color, but the amount is inadequate to address the funding gap. So as I'll show in a minute, the governor's proposal seeks to remedy this. The Public Interest Law Center has calculated how much school districts in our state need in order to provide an adequate education to its students. This figure divides up Pennsylvania's 500 school districts into groups of four groups or quartiles based on the share of children living in poverty. The first quartile on the left are school districts with higher poverty, and the fourth quartile are districts with lower poverty. As you can see, the gap remaining to reach adequate funding is much greater for high poverty districts than low poverty districts. And the average low poverty school district needs more money as well, but just less per student. This adequacy analysis is based on school funding for 2019-20, and we expect this adequacy gap has grown since then. So to address existing inequities in funding, the legislature in 2016 enacted a new method of distributing state aid to school districts, which is known as the Basic Education Funding Formula or the Fair Funding Formula. This formula requires all new basic education funding since 2014-15 to go through a formula that takes into account each district's distinct needs. So this includes things that affect the cost of funding students and the ability of each local school district to raise funds locally, like the number of students, the number of children living in poverty, the number of English language learners, the overall wealth and income of residents. So establishing the formula was an important step forward for the state, but it only applies to new basic education funding, which limits its impact. So this year, Governor Wolf has proposed a major change in state funding. He calls for all basic education funding provided last year, plus an additional $200 million to be distributed 100% through the Fair Funding Formula. And this will reduce funding to some school districts, so the governor also proposes to add an additional $1.15 billion to basic education funding to ensure no district gets less next year than this year. So this graph shows basic education funding in Pennsylvania. The darker blue is basic education funding that does not go through the Fair Funding Formula, and the light blue part, at the top of each bar is new funding each year that has gone through the Fair Funding Formula. As you can see, Governor Wolf is proposing a massive change in how the formula applies this year, with 85% of this money going through the formula. If you compare this to 2019-20, only 11% went through the formula. So this proposal would be a massive step forward, making Pennsylvania school funding much more equitable. So Governor Wolf's proposal is meant to begin to correct economic and racial inequities in education funding. This graph shows the impact of the governor's plan on the equity of school funding based on the poverty rate. We divide school districts into four groups again, each educating 1/4 of the K-12 public school students in the state. And this figure shows that the poorest districts would receive well over half of the funds, 58%, or over $1,800 per student. The other three quartiles all receive less than $600 per student, and this is a significant increase, but not as much as the high poverty districts. So here we're beginning to see, the most funding going to school districts with the most needs and who are the farthest away from achieving adequacy in funding. So once again, looking at this through a racial equity lens, this chart shows the same information but organized in quartiles by the share of Black students. Those school districts with the highest share of Black students, many of them poor districts, would receive 45% of the increase in state funds under the governor's proposal. Districts with the most Black students would receive 10 times as much funding as districts in the quartile with the least Black students. So this proposal would increase the equity of school funding based on poverty and the race ethnicity of students. We're currently writing an analysis that should be released soon, and we'll show, however, that it doesn't go all the way to creating adequate funding for all students. Pennsylvania still has more work to do, even if we do adopt this proposal, but this would help move us closer to equitable school funding. Okay, I'm going to move on to talk about charter school reform. Once again, the governor has proposed charter school reform. The governor's first proposed change is cyber charter tuition reform. And as we expected to see, the number of students attending cyber charters grew dramatically during the pandemic, increasing by 60% or over 22,000 students statewide. And as a result, during our current school year, cyber charters are costing school districts an estimated $350 million more than last year. Currently, both brick and mortar charter schools and cyber charter schools are paid the same rate, despite the cost for cyber charters being much less due to their, online learning model. Cyber charters and other charters receive an average of $13,000 per non-special education student. And Governor Wolf, proposes to decrease the rate for non-special education students in cyber charter schools to $9,500 per student. And this reform would save Pennsylvania school districts $130 million next year. The second proposal he makes is around special education funding formula. So he would apply the special education funding formula to charter schools. And currently, school districts receive funding for special education students based on a 4-tiered special education funding formula that was enacted in 2014. And this formula takes into account the actual cost of providing services for students with disabilities. But charter schools are exempt from this formula and continue to receive special education funding based on kind of a one-size-fits-all formula that pays the same tuition per student, regardless of the cost of the services the student needs. So this sets up a financial incentive for charter schools to enroll special education students who require fewer and less expensive services and exclude those who require more services. So the governor's proposal would apply the special education funding formula, which public schools use, to charter schools. And this reform would save taxpayers $99 million next year. So now I'm going to move on to special education. School districts are mandated by state and federal law to cover the cost of special education for students who need it. So the need for special education services has grown in recent years, but state funding has not kept up. And this puts enormous strain on local school districts to cover the cost. So to cover them, many school districts have to either raise their property taxes or cut other programs that aren't mandatory, so that they can meet the needs of their special education students. And as this figure shows, special education was essentially flat funded between the years 2008-9 and 2013-14. Governor Wolf has made some progress since taking office in 2015, increasing special education by 13%. But this year he proposes a substantial increase for special education of 17% or $200 million. Now I'm going to talk briefly about early childhood education. Since taking office, the governor has more than doubled funding for pre-K. This year, he proposes an increase of $30 million for early childhood education. $25 million will go to pre-K counts and $5 million for Head Start supplemental assistance. And this funding will lead to over 3,200 additional children going into high-quality programs. All right, I'm on to higher education, and I'm hoping folks are still with me. I'm going to go through some higher education slides, and then I'm going to end talking about human services. So this is higher education is another area where the governor has proposed an important change this year. So this graph shows per capita investment by state for higher education. And as you can see, Pennsylvania ranks 48th in the nation in terms of state per capita funding for higher ed. You can see us, we're the very small orange bar at the bottom of the chart. Pennsylvania spends less than half of the national per capita average on higher education. This low state investment leads to higher tuition for students. And Pennsylvania also ranks 48th in the nation in terms of average tuition and fees at public four-year colleges. So as you can imagine, high tuition leads to greater student debt for Pennsylvania students. In 2018-19, 65% of college graduates in the state held student loan debt, and the average debt per person was over $39,000, which ranks Pennsylvania second highest in the nation for student debt. The high cost of college obviously leads students to have to make difficult choices about whether they go to college and incur incredible amounts of debt or not attending at all. So this figure shows the tuition burden for students by race. The average in-state net price at public four-year universities accounted for 56% of median household income for Black students and 48% for Hispanic students. This places higher education out of reach for many students, especially Black and Hispanic students. Pennsylvania, in fact, ranks worst in the nation out of all 50 states in terms of tuition burden for white non-Hispanic students, Black students, and Hispanic students. Higher education this year is nearly flat funded at $1.76 billion. One thing I do want to mention is that there is an increase of $1.4 million to support a new community college in Erie. This will be the first new community college in Pennsylvania in 25 years. So funding for criminal justice is now significantly greater than state funding for higher education, but it hasn't always been that way. The Department of Criminal Justice remains the third highest funded department in the state, behind pre-K to 12 and human services. And as this figure shows, in 2011-12, the Department of Criminal Justice, which was then the Department of Corrections, surpassed funding for higher education. But there is some good news here. The Governor Wolf is proposing an important new program that will help students afford college. It's called the Nelly Scholarship Fund, and it would help full-time undergraduate students enrolled in one of Pennsylvania's 14 state system universities afford tuition. So students from households with a family income less than $104,800 per year would qualify, and the scholarship would cover the cost of fees and tuition that aren't covered by other federal or state grants. Students would be required to stay in Pennsylvania for as many years as they receive their scholarship, or the money would be converted to low interest loans. To fund this, Governor Wolf proposed to use $200 million per year in annual slot machine revenue that currently is used to pay the prices for racehorses through the state's Racehorse Development Trust Fund. So this figure shows the concerning reality that currently the state subsidizes each racehorse purse more than it does each student attending state system schools. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up by talking about human services here. Governor Wolf has proposed a budget of $14.38 billion in general funds for the Department of Human Services. This is $759 million over available funds in 2020-21, including supplements. As this figure shows, the two largest areas of spending for DHS are medical assistance at 32% and long-term living at 28%. Funding for long-term living would increase nearly 19% this year, or to $4 billion under Governor Wolf's plan. And this is the largest area of growing costs for DHS, mostly because of our aging population. So there are several areas where the governor proposes new initiatives or additional funding for human services. And I won't talk about all of these, but I wanted to mention a couple. First, childcare. Childcare centers in Pennsylvania have obviously been hard hit by the pandemic. Parents have pulled their kids from childcare centers over concerns about the spread of the virus, or because they have lost jobs or working from home. Childcare centers had to react quickly to make safe space for children and staff, all of which comes at a cost. And since last March, when the pandemic first hit the state, $220 million in CARES Act funding has gone to support childcare providers. An additional federal money was allocated at the end of 2020, but has not yet been dispersed. So every 3 years, DHS conducts a child care market rate survey, and they found that the base reimbursement rates for the Child Care Works program, which is subsidized child care for low-income families, is very low, around the 25th percentile of the market rate, which is much below the federal government's recommendations that reimbursement rates should be in the 75th percentile. So this year, Governor Wolf is proposing to use $87 million of federal funds to raise the reimbursement rate to the 40th percentile. And these higher rates for providers should lead to more equitable access to quality care and stronger child care programs. Another area I wanted to mention is this last bullet. The governor proposes $1 million for housing security to reduce the number of children in foster care due to unstable housing. So in previous research, we have done on gas drilling in Greene County. We found that one of the largest human service costs related to the drilling boom was foster care costs. Kids were, actually being removed from parents due to unstable housing and increasing rents in the county. Separating children from their families due to poverty or housing instability is wrong and is obviously devastating for both parents and children. The Children's Bureau of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services found that housing instability is a precipitating factor in at least 10% of foster care cases nationally. According to data from Kids Count, Pennsylvania appears to be worse than this national average. As this figure shows, between October 2010 and September 2015, housing instability was a reason for roughly 15% of foster care placements in Pennsylvania. Between October 2015 and September 2018, that number increased to about 17% of foster care placements. So this is an issue that needs to be addressed at the state level, and I'm glad that there's some acknowledgement and movement on this issue. The $1 million in new funding would go towards supporting a partnership between county child welfare offices, community-based organizations, and housing partners aimed at reducing the number of kids removed from their parents due to unstable, inadequate, or no housing. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Marc to talk about the American Rescue Plan.
Thanks, Diana. We didn't think we could conclude this budget analysis without talking for at least a moment about the American Rescue Plan and the state budget. As you know, the American Rescue Plan was passed by the House and the Senate this last week. I hope you know how much good stuff is in it. Really major improvements in healthcare and childcare and subsidies for low-income workers and for families with children that are vastly expanded. Something that progressives have been trying to accomplish for a long time, which is a universal child benefit, is now basically a reality for the next 2 years, and we hope for many years beyond. New subsidies for insurance on the Affordable Care Act are in place, as well as checks going to 6 million or so Pennsylvanians and extending unemployment insurance. There's also money for the state and for local governments, $7 billion for the state and about $5 billion for local governments. What should we do with that money? We're not going to give you a whole analysis here. We'll be talking about it soon. But I want to just mention a couple of things. Number one, we need to spend it. We actually have to spend in the next 2 years. That's a requirement of the legislation. And it's critical that we do so because we need to accelerate the recovery. The money is there in part to rescue the economy, to provide the funding to individuals, to businesses that will enable them to open up and get back to work. So the idea that we should just salt it away or cut taxes or something like that is a pretty bad idea. We need to spend it. Number two, we need to fill gaps in providing relief. Now, there are targeted relief programs for small businesses, particularly in the hospitality industry. There are targeted programs to help homeowners and to help renters. There's a number of other targeted programs. I mentioned the healthcare and the childcare programs, but we're not sure whether all the gaps in funding in those areas are going to be protected by all those targeted programs. So one thing we're going to be looking at is, are there still holes to fill with helping small businesses, with helping restaurants, with helping people get healthcare or provide housing or pay for their utilities or things like that. Number three, we think we should still embrace the governor's spending plans and enact but delay the tax increases. The governor has a bold plan to reform how we fund K-12 education. We can use the tax money provided by the American Rescue Plan to pay for that spending plan and for other spending plans that are badly needed with regard to infrastructure and with regard to environmental protection. Ultimately, the state will have to pick up the cost of them, so we should go forward with the governor's tax increases. But because of the American Rescue Plan, we can postpone the implementation of the increase in the personal income tax rate until a later time. And of course, we probably should save a little for the next rainy day. And it's a good thing that we have 2 years to spend the money. We don't expect, even with a fairly rapid recovery, that state revenues will be restored to the path they were on before the COVID-19 pandemic for at least next year, that is the year starting July 1st, 2021, and the following year, July 1st, 2022. By the third year, by 23, we think we'll be back on track, but some of the money should be saved for not the budget year beginning on July 1st, 21, but the budget year beginning July 1st, 22. We'll have a lot more to say about the American Rescue Plan, both in terms of how it benefits Pennsylvania and in terms of how it affects the state budget later on. But I thought I just ought to say a little bit about that now. And now I think we can stop and take some questions.
Okay, thanks, Marc. Appreciate this presentation so much. Really a lot for folks to think about. We do have one question we received so far, and just again to let folks know, there is a Q&A function there along the side of where you're watching this, along with the chat function. If you have a question, please submit it in the Q&A. The question we have here, first one is from Michelle. Michelle's question is a question that was raised to her by a small business that she's working with on the personal income tax increase and the corporate net income tax decrease. She said that small, especially very small businesses who were hurt most in COVID won't see a dime of corporate net income tax decrease because they pay personal income tax. She said that personal income tax going up will kill small businesses. Could you please share statistics on that issue? Many thanks for considering this question.
Well, I'll respond to that. I don't have statistics to help with that, but I think the basic principle is really clear. Anyone who pays personal income tax will benefit from the tax forgiveness program. So if a small business has very low profits and those are returned to the individual owner of the business as personal income, and their income is low, they will benefit. If their income is higher, they'll pay more, and I think that's basically fair. The personal income tax is only going up to 4.498 or 49% under the governor's proposal. That's far lower than the personal income tax at high rates for those making higher incomes in all our neighboring states. The rate on the top 1% under this proposal will still be below 6% in Pennsylvania. Most of the states around us are far higher. New York and New Jersey are above 10%. I don't think a small increase in taxes paid by business owners who are making money will hurt them. And I don't think there's any evidence that higher taxes has undermined small businesses in neighboring states. And again, a very small business that's making just a little bit of money will benefit from the governor's tax proposal. Thanks for your question.
Thanks, Marc. Yeah, we're going to take a look here and see if we have any more questions coming in. I don't see any questions beyond that one in the chat right now. But what we'll say is, since we do have a little bit of time here, we can have someone just put a note in the chat if you'd like to. Just use the chat and say, I have a question, and we'll try to get you unmuted so you can ask the question directly of Marc. And let's see, if you have a question there in the chat or you want to ask a question, just give us a quick note in the chat and we'll be ready to unmute you. Well, I think it's possible you may have either already asked or already addressed all the things that people would have had questions about, or people are so overwhelmed and depressed that they may be having trouble. Let's see. I think I got another question coming in here. Let's see. What do we have? Oh, here we go. Do you think the legislature will allow for the governor's spending considering the American Rescue Plan? That's from Brian.
I would say that the legislature should be more eager to accept the governor's spending plan because they're not going to have to pay for it by taxes immediately. Of course, at some point, taxes will have to be raised to make up for the federal funds that run out in 2 years. We know that this General Assembly is very reluctant to raise taxes. I think we have to help them get over it. I think we have to help them understand that Pennsylvanians are sick of a tax system that asks people in the middle and the bottom to pay at twice the rate of people at the top. People are ready for a tax system that asks people to pay their fair share so that we can invest in education and make our education system fair. One other factor I should mention, there's a lawsuit in the courts right now that is challenging the highly inequitable and frankly racist funding of our K-12 schools. And at some point that lawsuit may succeed and the General Assembly may be ordered by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to fix our system of higher education. I'm sorry, of K-12 education. They might want to get out in front of that lawsuit and fix it now. And if they don't, I think at some point they're going to be forced to fix it. It'd be a good idea to fix it now with the federal funds that we're receiving and then raise taxes later.
Thanks, Mark. Another question here. This is less a question about the budget and more a question about the materials that you were using today. A question from Sandra is, how does one get a copy of the slides and your analysis? I can actually answer this one. By the way, my name is Jeff. I'm the outreach director at PBPC and tried to put together this summit today. And I think we're working out a few of the bugs here. But if you go to the summit webpage that we've set up, or if you use the Waiver app, and you find the agenda, on the agenda, you'll see the opening plenary session. If you click on that, that opens up and there's the description of this particular session. But if you scroll down at the bottom of that, there's a link to access the budget analysis, which was just released today that Mark and Diana have been talking about. And below that, there's another link that you can actually go and see and download the slides. We know there are some issues depending on the size of people's screens and what you had open. It may have been hard to see some of the charts and graphs, but you can go there and check them all out very quickly and easily. Looks like we're getting a few more questions coming in here, Mark. Let's see what we have now. From your experience in the political side of the budget, in what areas of the budget do you believe the Republican legislature will be most willing to work on a compromise with the governor? And that was asked by Michelle. Thanks for the question, Michelle. Mark?
I'm not actually sure. I don't know if Diana would have an idea. I think, sadly, the majority party in the General Assembly has been resistant to dealing with any of the problems we've been identifying over the years, or that the governor has identified in this budget proposal. But the answer is they have to hear from their constituents. What the General Assembly does depends in large part on what their constituents demand. Now, one thing might happen is we know the Senate 2 years ago did pass a small increase in minimum wage to $9.50 over a couple of years. That's terribly inadequate, but it's better than where we are right now. And I think that's one area where maybe we will see some movement from the General Assembly. Diana, you have any thoughts?
My only thought was, I was kind of interested in the fact that the governor attached the severance tax to the back to work plan, because I feel like that's, funding for a workforce and businesses tends to get support from both parties. But the severance tax might get in the way of that. But I'm curious to see what the response will be.
I just thought of one other thing. When the General Assembly gets free money, they often try to solve problems so as to kick the can down the road and dealing with the underlying issues. One problem that's coming up is that funding for public transit is running out. We are in the last year of in which funds from PennDOT is transferred to public transit subsidies around the state. So that's a $400 million loss in those subsidies. Without them, SEPTA, the Port Authority, and all the bus systems in 12 or 13 cities around the state will collapse. They might be willing to use some of the rescue plan money to pay for that funding for at least 2 more years. Again, that just puts off the reckoning. But that, in fact, has been the General Assembly's approach to budgeting for the last 10 years, using gimmicks, short-term revenues, moving payment dates, moving revenue dates to paper over a persistent structural deficit.
Okay, Mark, we have another question here from someone named Susan. The question is, can you talk more about how the state can use money now to improve healthcare delivery into the future?
I think one thing that's pretty clear is that we've been underinvesting in public health infrastructure. The amount of money spent for public health has been flat for, I think, 8 years. And if you wonder why we were so badly prepared for COVID-19, that's part of the answer. We have public health departments, Diana, correct me, only 10 counties, with 11th one coming online, Delco.
Yeah, there are 10 local health departments. Some are county and some are municipal.
Yeah, and
so yeah, funding.
We need more.
Yeah, Wolf had proposed this year an $8.3 million increase for local health departments, and some of these funds would go towards creating a new local health department in Delaware County. But one interesting piece of information that I learned recently was that West Virginia actually has a local health department in every one of its, I think, 55 counties or something. And Pennsylvania ranks pretty low in terms of our spending on public health. I think we're 7th from the bottom among all states in terms of public health. So there's some increased funds this year, but we still need more to make sure that we're adequately responding.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Diana. Another question we have here is from Josh. This question is, this may be a more subjective and political question, but how do you see the governor's proposal playing politically in the more conservative parts of the state? Thanks, Josh.
The conservative parts of the state tend to be rural areas. That's where the leaders of the assembly and the majority party mostly comes from. And the politics of it is, I think, has two sides. On the one side, we know that there's tremendous distrust for government and for the kinds of public investment programs that we are supporting. And we know that over the last couple of years, the Republican Party has moved sharply to the right and become even more distrustful of government. But there's another side to it. And that side is that the rural areas of the state are the ones that are hurting the worst. Urban areas are doing better, except for serious pockets of poverty that's mostly tied to racial segregation in those urban areas. Suburban areas are doing much better. We're seeing a long-term economic decline in rural Pennsylvania by most of the measures of social problems, percent of people on poverty, percent of people who rely on medical assistance, low wages, deaths from substance abuse disorder and overdoses. Rural counties are some of the worst off places in the state. At some point, we hope people from rural counties will recognize that the programs that we've been supporting, education programs, infrastructure, environmental programs, pollution's worse in a lot of rural counties, that benefit those counties, and people there wake up and recognize how critical it is that they get the kind of public support that is necessary in the state, and they join with those of us who've been supporting these public investments.
Thanks, Mark. Question that came in through the chat is from Kenneth. Kenneth's question, asking for more elaboration, is I would like to hear more about distributing the revenue generated by fracking.
Do you want to take that, Diana?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the program that Governor Wolf is proposing is called the Back to Work PA Plan. And really the goal of it is to kind of bolster economic recovery by supporting both workers and businesses that have been negatively impacted by COVID. And maybe about 2 years ago, the state's Workforce Command Center identified a number of barriers around workforce development, barriers to getting people access to good jobs. So 2 of those barriers that were identified were childcare and workforce training. And both of those are addressed in the plan. I know there's also a hope to fund broadband, which would also help, especially rural areas, but also some urban areas as well. So that's the plan for the back to work, and that's where the severance tax would go. So it would actually, I think the program would be paid for through a bond, and then it would be paid back with the severance tax. The severance tax, I think Governor Wolf is proposing like a 2.8% combined tax rate, which includes the existing impact fee. And that would bring in about $30 million per year, or $3 billion over 10 years. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Diana. And a related question that's come in through the Q&A feature is, what is legislature's argument to Governor Wolf's proposed natural gas severance tax? With the wells damaging to both environments and towns, are these representatives truly reflective of their constituents?
We asked the latter.
Speculative one, yeah.
I mean, we asked that question a lot. I mentioned we have one of the highest corporate tax rates in the country, and the tax is only paid by Pennsylvania corporations. It's not paid by corporations outside of the state. In a truly democratic government, our legislators would presumably care about their constituents more than they care about multinational or international corporations. So I think the fact that they haven't closed the Delaware loophole is one indication that they're often more attuned to the interests of the big corporations that provide campaign contributions for them than they are to their own constituents. In this case, again, the benefits of a severance tax, whether it goes into general revenues as we proposed in the past, or whether it funds this back to work program, which will help businesses in Pennsylvania and help workers in Pennsylvania, would seem to be a pretty obvious thing that a democratic government would do. There really isn't an argument that's serious made by the other side. They all say if we tax natural gas fracking, they won't do it anymore, and we'll see the natural gas industry disappear. I mean, frankly, that's just absurd. The natural gas can't move; it's here. Natural gas drilled in other states is subject to severance taxes far higher than Governor Wolf has proposed. From what we understand from the geologists we talked to, the natural gas in Pennsylvania is in fact a little easier to get out of the ground than it is in many other states. So it's simply absurd to say that if we put on a severance tax, we will lose this business. That's right-wing ideology posing as public policy analysis.
Thanks for that answer, Mark, and thank you for the question, Matthew. I'm going to go back to a question that was submitted a little bit earlier. Thanks for being patient with us, Margaret. The question is, have you heard anything about the National Infrastructure Bank Coalition Initiative? If passed, it would fund infrastructure improvements without raising taxes and would not add to the deficit. Please check out the nibcoalition.com for info. Any thoughts on this, Mark? Any opinions? Any ideas?
Yeah, we've been talking to some state legislators about taking advantage of it, and we'll be doing a report. It's probably still a couple months away, talking about the benefits of the state of that idea. We are very hopeful that a major infrastructure investment program will be coming from the Biden administration, will be part of a second big reconciliation bill. And that will provide, I don't know if the National Infrastructure Bank will be part of that proposal or not. We don't really have a lot of details what President Biden is going to propose, but we're hopeful that it will be, and we think it's a really good idea.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Margaret, for raising that issue. Another question we have coming in from Brian is, The governor's budget doesn't address the housing issues in the Commonwealth, eviction prevention past the pandemic, neighborhood revitalizing, et cetera, and reduces Keystone communities by, I think, 70+%. Are there any other avenues in Wolf's budget to address housing issues?
Well, there's short-term and long-term things. Short-term issues, helping people stay in their homes because of the pandemic hurting them, is mostly addressed by money that's being used from the CARES package. I think there's about a $400 million program that the General Assembly enacted just about a month ago with the last of the CARES Act dollars. There's also federal money that provides that support. We think there is a long-term housing problem in the state. Affordable housing is getting scarce, particularly in gentrifying neighborhoods and urban areas, but also in suburban and rural areas as well. It's going to take a lot of thinking, I think, on our part and the part of other folks interested in this issue, to come up with bolder ideas that really address those issues. And I don't think there's much in the governor's budget. Although I'll ask Diana if she has some wants to talk about anything she's noticed that really is up to the scale we need in this state. But it is something we're thinking about at the PBPC team, and we hope to address soon.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I mean, the one thing that I noticed I talked about in the presentation around, it's related to foster care and making sure that families have stable housing.
Thanks, Diana. Thanks, Mark. Let's see, another question we have here comes from Jack. Jack's question is, will there be any changes to waiver funding for ID individuals? Hoping we can be able to help our direct support professionals more in coming years.
Tanya, you want to talk about what's in the budget for that?
Yeah, here, let me find it real quick. Is this direct care worker training? Is the question about?
I think funding for intellectual disability programs.
Oh, okay.
And waiver programs.
So there's two programs, the community living waiver programs and consolidated waiver programs. And these programs, provide services to individuals with intellectual disabilities who are, so funding, I forget the total amount increase. I don't have it in front of me, but the additional funds will move folks off the waiting list, 732 individuals off the waiting list for the community living waiver slots, and then 100 individuals into consolidated waiver.
Thanks, Diana. Question here from Sheila. The question is, what can be done about the illiteracy problem in the Erie School District? That is the reason why standardized tests are not being passed. The children cannot read, is that they cannot read.
I don't think either of us know enough about the specifics of the Erie School District to really address that. I know the Erie School District has had persistent funding problems. A couple of years ago, it got an additional appropriation beyond what it would have received through the Basic Education Fund because of that persistent underfunding of the schools there. So aside from saying that, a much fair funding of our education would help the Erie Public Schools, I can't address that specifically.
Thanks for the question, and we'll continue to look into that. Another question we have here comes from Arlene. Question is, we don't have a public quality pre-K program in our district. Is the $30 million for existing or for developing new pre-K or both?
That's a really good question. That's something I'm going to have to look into.
Well, we know that the
sorry, go ahead.
governor's investment has expanded pre-K opportunity over the last few years. It's been a major investment. I haven't looked at the data in about a year, but a year ago we were still behind neighboring states in terms of percentage of kids who have access to pre-K education. We think this is a really vital form of investment, and we're glad the governor has been adding so much money to it, but we were really far behind. And it's going to take a while to catch up.
Thank you for your question, Carlene, and thanks, Mark, for addressing that. Another question we just received is from Maureen. Question is, in the American Rescue Plan, there is a dedicated FMAP bump of 10% for home and community-based services, the Medicaid-funded program that supports people with disabilities and older adults to live in their communities. How can we ensure that this funding is used for relief community programs and providers instead of backfilling the budget?
That's a really good question. And one of the things our team, I don't think they even know it all yet because I just started thinking about it yesterday. One of the things our team is going to be doing over the next couple of weeks is looking at each of the programs that are part of the American Rescue Plan and trying to figure out what are the constraints on them. What does the federal government require us to do? We know, for example, with regard to the $7 billion in funding the state cannot save them, has to use the money in 2 years, cannot use it for tax cuts. We're going to look at each of those programs and look at those constraints. We're also going to look at each of those programs and look at who actually makes the decisions. And we're going to make all this information public so that the public can influence decision makers to make sure the money is used for the right purpose. And this is a really good example where we want to make sure that the money from this program goes to expanding access so critical needs are being met. I have not looked at the details of that program yet. I don't know what it requires. Some of these things may be solved because the regulations prohibit backfilling of lost revenues with federal funds. Some of them may not. We will be alerting people in our allies in the social services world and the public as large about where they need to be working really hard to make sure that the money is spent in the right way. And that's going to be a major activity that PBPC is going to be carrying out over the next 6 weeks.
Thanks, Maureen, for that question. And thanks, Mark, as well for answering that. And I think we all need to be vigilant and keep an eye on how these funds are being distributed. I think we have all of the questions answered now, which is good because that has us kind of right on time here for heading toward the end of this particular session. I know, Mark, you had talked about putting up on screen the web page from PBPC, listing the PBPC staff. If you want to take care of that, I'll just work on a couple other things here if you want to do the screen share. I want to thank both Mark and Diana for providing such in-depth analysis and research today and answering the questions. Again, we've noted it once or twice, but the analysis of the governor's budget that they provided the overview of here today is available on the PBPC website, but it's also available on the Budget Summit webpage and through the Whova app. If you go to the agenda section and you find the opening plenary session, you can click on the opening plenary session. You'll see the description of this session that you just saw. And if you scroll down, there's a link to the report and the analysis that was done. There's also a link to the slides that Mark and Diana presented. Lots of good in-depth information there and the charts on that. Mark, do you want to say anything here about this page before we go into a couple other things? Or?
Well, I want to encourage you all to look at it. This is our staff, Claire Kovacs, Senior Research Analyst, Mason Mortaza, Research Associate, Stephanie Frank, Office Manager, Steve Herzenberg, the Executive Director, Lavana Leyendecker, Associate Director, Ricardo Almaldovar, Organizing Associate, Adrian Stanley, Digital Director, Diane Polson, who you've just met, Kirita Kenner, our Director of Campaigns, Katie Personette, another Organizing Associate Director of Campaigns now, Jeff, who you've been hearing from, Erica Freeman, our Deputy Communications Director, and me. And you can find out more about us there, and you can contact us. We always love to hear from folks, so I want to encourage you to go to this page and look at our whole new website. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty spectacular compared to what it was a couple of years ago, and it's getting better all the time. We're adding more things to it and more ways for you to get information about not only state, but federal politics and public policy.
Thanks, Mark. A few more things kind of wrapping up, giving some information before we close out this session and head on to lunch and then another session this afternoon. One thing is that also on the Summit webpage and on this Waiver app, in the section there on the agenda for the opening plenary session, there is a place where you can provide feedback on this session, asks kind of what were some of your favorite things about this, suggestions that we can make to improve this part of our budget summit in future years. You'll probably get an email shortly as well, reminding you to take that survey and provide some feedback. We really appreciate all the input that we get from folks. Little plug here, in addition to our website, where you can go and find, get email addresses to get in contact with Mark or Diana. If you have questions for them that didn't get answered today or you think of later on, you're welcome to go there and contact us with those kinds of questions as well. I'll also say that we want to plug Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center's Facebook page. We put up a lot of information there quickly as news breaks, as we put out new reports and research. Also, PBPC's Twitter account is a great place to keep up on what's going on because there is a lot going on. So we'll be wrapping up here and like we said, giving time for folks to get lunch and then come back at 1 p.m. today. You will definitely want to be here at 1 p.m. because this will be our keynote address for the Budget Summit. It is being delivered by Governor Tom Wolf. So this will be a great opportunity to hear directly from the governor about some of his priorities and his vision for Pennsylvania for the rest of this year and heading into next year, which is going to be the final year of his second term in office. We'll also have a time for folks to submit questions as well for the governor. Again, remember that Q&A box on the side where you can go and submit questions. We're going to try to take as many as we can. So that's a good way to submit those there. If you can make them concise, we'll try to take as many as we can. We're not going to be able to have the governor here for the full length of the session. He's only going to be able to be with us for probably about half an hour. Following the time when the governor wraps up, we will be closing out that session with a preview of what we have coming up for the rest of the Budget Summit. Along with coming back at 1 p.m. today, you can come back online for the Budget Summit for the next 3 Thursdays at 1 p.m. For the next 3 Thursdays at 1 p.m., we will be offering our workshops. There will be 2 workshops each of those 3 weeks. They'll run from 1 p.m. to 2:15. There's information on the Budget Summit webpage and on the Waiver app. You can take a look at all of the different workshop topics, who the presenters are, and we're going to provide some more information on that this afternoon. We're going to hear from each one of the folks who will be moderating and coordinating a workshop. You'll get a little preview from them about what they're thinking about covering, how they're going to be covering it, and who will be helping them with that. So you want to stick around for that at the end of our afternoon session today. And speaking of the next 3 Thursdays, it's Thursday, March 18th, Thursday, March 25th, and Thursday, April 1st. After that workshop session ends on Thursday, April 1st, we will take a very brief break that day, and we will come back for the closing plenary, which will be a legislative panel discussion with some of the progressive champions in our state General Assembly. That's going to be moderated by our friend Corinna Wilson, who will also be taking questions from the audience and posing those to the members of that legislative panel. So you'll want to be here with us for all 3 of the next Thursdays, starting at 1 p.m., but definitely come back today at 1 to hear from the governor directly. If you have additional feedback, questions, we know there were some tech issues for folks. I had a number of emails coming in. Feel free to reach out to us either through the Waiver app or you can email me directly. I can't answer all of them during our sessions, but I will try to get back to you. If you had any problems today, we may try to see if we can help resolve those before the Governor comes to join us at 1 p.m. So that's it for today. Again, or for not for today, for this morning's session. Again, thanks so much to my colleagues, Marc Stier and Diana Polson. Thank you to all of you for your interest, not just in this session, but for your interest in the entire Pennsylvania Budget Summit for 2021. Thanks, everyone. Have a great lunch. Come back and join us at 1 p.m. Take care.